Well, good afternoon, everybody. Hey. Welcome to the panel room at QED. I'm Andy Wilson, one of the co-organisers of QED. Having a good time? Yeah! Okay. So it's a duty. I have to do it. I ask everybody. I'm joined, in this panel, we will explore the general aspects of Mormonism and also shine some light into the corners where the skeletons may lie. I'm joined by three former Mormons. Would you care to introduce yourselves? Bryce, could you start with you, please?
Yeah, my name is Bryce Blankenagel. I host the Naked Mormonism podcast, all about Mormon history. And I was born in the covenant, as they say, in Utah, and now no longer a Mormon.
Yay, Bryce! And I'm Cara Santa Maria. I host the Talk Nerdy podcast, and I'm a rogue on The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. And I was also born into the Mormon Church in the Bible Belt in Texas.
I'm Greg Rattey. I'm an LGBT rights campaigner, and I haven't got the excuse these two have because I was converted into Mormonism when I was 19, and I live in Hertfordshire.
Okay, we'll go for about 20 minutes and then we'll take some questions. I suspect there may be questions. We'll take some questions. And then we've got a few more things to cover and we'll take some more questions at the end, hopefully, if there's time, yeah? Whilst there's a lot to be curious about or even laugh at in Mormonism, I should also include a mention that when we've done that first round of questions, the second question after that, there will be discussion about suicide in young Mormons, okay? So I'm just letting you know about that now. But I'll give you another warning just before that happens. Now, my brother Christopher became a Mormon when I was about 14 years old. He was roughly 19. He'd been recruited by a colleague at the summer job he was working while at university. By the time he was 21, he had quit university. Mormon men spend 2 years knocking on doors during their mission. This is a birthday card Chris sent to my mum. It's dated 20th of October, 1983. And I would like to read the card to you, as well as the notes that my mum made on the back, okay?
Andy, that was literally the day after I was born.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
That was literally before my parents were married.
I do enjoy a ruined somber moment, don't you? Happy birthday, Mum. I hope you have a really good time on your birthday. I want you to know that I'm having a really good time on my mission. My flat's good. My companion is excellent. He's a real cowboy from Beaver, Utah. Beaver?
Cheese curds.
We get on really well and we're eating lots. I'm meeting lots of good people and I'm really enjoying myself. So don't worry, have a great time. Try and forget our differences and give my love to Jane, Andrew and Claire. Lots of love, Chris. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Okay. So this is what my mum wrote on the back of the envelope. I presume in preparation for either a letter or a conversation with Chris. Mormonism means only one thing, deception. You have called me Satan, a lost soul. You have allowed your friends to call me a dreadful mother. Since becoming a Mormon, you have lost your academic career, lost your home, taken longer to pay off your debts, and now Mormonism has taken you away from your girlfriend to knock on doors and to practice deception on lonely, unsuspecting people. On top of all this, you have lost your freedom of mind, body, and soul. You were once a free man, and now you are not. Jesus died on Calvary to save you. I am free to explore all faiths. I have the same freedom to condemn Mormonism as you have within Mormonism to condemn me, your mother, underlined, and brand me Satan, capital letters. For this reason, I never want to hear or see you ever again. God bless you, my son Christopher. I pray that you may be saved for Jesus' sake.
Gee.
It's pretty heavy, right? So that's the boot set. Bryce, has Mormonism always been divisive?
Since it was started, absolutely. It's been dividing families, ripping people apart. You read letters from when the church started from members who converted and their families renouncing them. I mean, from the very first instance all the way through to modern day, it's been extremely divisive. And there's plenty of reasons for it to be divisive that I think we'll probably be exploring today.
Same question, Cara.
Oh, sure. I mean, as Bryce said, it's funny because we can point to the inception of Mormon. We know when it started, so we know a lot about the church history. But it's divisive for many reasons. The letter's interesting because it's the equal and opposite of what I expected, right? Because I don't think that Mormonism goes as far as Jehovah's or as Scientologists. You know, I'm no longer Mormon, but I'm still quite close to my family. There's nothing, I think, intrinsic in the gospel that says that you become blacklisted. You may get excommunicated. It may be, you know, I think it's dependent on the family. But it is divisive. You know, African Americans weren't allowed into the church until very late, or to hold the priesthood. I would never be able to hold the priesthood. It's an incredibly misogynistic religion, as most of them are. And so, but yeah, it's divisive in that way, definitely.
Did you ever think your church was not like the others? That's aimed at you, Cara.
Oh, so I had a very interesting experience because I left the church when I was about 14, 15. But when people ask me for my eureka moment, I don't think I had one. I'm not sure I ever believed. And so I'm not sure I ever had the experience of, oh, we're the one true church. I mean, I was told that plenty of times by my family, but I think I was much more interested in pleasing my parents than I was in upholding any sort of covenants or anything like that. And again, it's a very different experience for young girls in the church because they don't really let you in on anything. Really, like they're not grooming you for any sort of position of power within the church. And so I do think that I probably have a very different perspective than the guys on the panel who I would assume held the priesthood. Yeah, you both went through. Yeah, they were at the right age where they were given certain responsibilities that I not only never had, but would not have had I stayed through to that age.
But much in the same way, though, I mean, for women in the church, it's a different kind of pigeonholing or grooming procedure. For men, it's you are always trying to aspire to the highest ranks, whereas with women, it's like you stay pure, you hold yourself until you get married, and then that marriage night, that's when you can really become the woman, the broodmare that you've been pigeonholed to be your entire life. So it's wildly different for men and women, but it's also a commodification of human emotions in much the same way.
I think it's very divisive. It's been divisive right from the beginning. I think as well. I think we'll touch upon the blacks and priesthoods later on, which was so divisive and so cruel. I think, as far as I was concerned, I was converted, my sister was converted, my dad was converted, and I had a mother who was just sort of a liberal Christian, if you like. So it didn't destroy our family, but I know that it has destroyed a lot of families. A lot of, once you become a Mormon, everybody else are Gentiles, and things like if you want to see one of your family members get married in the temple and you're not a Mormon, then that is just an impossibility. You're just in a separate room like this while they go off. And so I'd say it's very, very divisive.
And not just not a Mormon. I couldn't see my sister get married because I didn't have the temple recommend to do it. You have to be a married Mormon who carries, who has made those covenants. Yeah. So you can't, as a young person, you can't observe a wedding either.
And pay your tithing.
Well, yeah, but we all had to do that. I had to do that when I was like 8 years old.
Greg, can you just say something about, because you were 19-ish?
I was.
So who led the idea of your family becoming Mormons? And did you feel as though you were just going along with it, or were you pretty keen on it?
No, when I look back on my life, I mean, I'm a gay man, and at 19, I hadn't come out. I didn't come out till I was 32. And my sister was a mad Osmond fan. I don't know if you remember that. And she was a mad Osmond fan. And then I had a girl where I was working, where I trained, and she was a Mormon. And she said, well, why don't we get the missionaries to come around and see you? And because I hadn't come out, I was probably looking for something. If I reflect back on life, I was looking at a void that I was trying to fill. And so I went straight to it.
Yeah, okay. Bryce, you were born in Utah. there are 3.1 million people there and 61% are Mormon. In that population, was there for you a point when you thought, hang on, this is a bit weird?
Utah Mormonism is different than any other Mormonism. It's a very insular group, and that obviously is a product of what Mormonism was when the Mormons got out there. It was a very isolated and insular community. The first time I realized that not everybody in the world was Mormon was the first time I had a sleepover at a friend's house in high school who wasn't Mormon. And he had all the cool video games, and he actually had cable television in his bedroom, which, that was an aberration. You could get like HBO in there. But you don't really realize how insular and how Utah is unless you live there and then you live outside of it. It took me moving outside of Utah to realize that not everybody in the world is Mormon. Whereas that was kind of the idea, the culture that I was brought up with was everywhere in the world is just like Utah, or everywhere in the world is trying to be like Utah because Utah is the bomb.
Bryce, can you just take this opportunity to do your famous 2-minute summary of the history of Mormonism, please? It will be famous after this.
Listen to Naked Mormonism? No. So the church was started by a guy named Joseph Smith. He was a founding prophet of Mormonism. He was born in 1805, and then he started the church in 1830. He was steeped in magic and occult and using dowsing rods and hunting for buried treasure by putting a magic rock in his hat and putting the hat around his face. And then he claimed to find the gold plates by that same method, and then he translated them into the Book of Mormon, and it started in 1830. He's an extremely charismatic guy, very polarizing to a lot of people, and he had a very colorful and interesting career and then ran for president of the United States and then was assassinated in a prison.
Very nice.
Right. And I would argue justifiably so. And then after that, there was a massive schism crisis, and Brigham Young took the largest contingency of Mormons out to Mexico. That became Utah territory. And he was named governor, appointed governor, and he was also prophet of the church. So he was the central ruling authority, and he created Utah. And they've only begrudgingly ceded those theocratic intentions as it has been pressured by the secular world.
Thank you. I've got 3 follow-up questions, so one for each of you. Greg, how many people can I marry?
Well, polygamy was practiced in the early church. When I joined, there's lots of things you're not told when you first get involved in it. And one of the things I wasn't told that Joseph Smith was a polygamist, but Brigham Young was a polygamist. Joseph Smith, incidentally, had, I think, 33 wives. But the answer to your question is you can only have one wife now. But that, again, as the Mormonism has evolved, because it isn't evolving, changing according to circumstance, religion, but you can only have one wife now.
Unless you want to be FLDS and live in like a weird compound.
Fundamentalists.
Yes, fundamentalists.
Latter-day Saints.
They're not approved by the Mormon church, but there are some offshoots that,
That's in Utah, though, isn't it? It's not,
No, they're like in New Mexico and Arizona, right?
They actually created this little commune basically that's right on the border between Utah and Arizona. It's 2 different towns. The area is known as Short Creek, which is really convenient because when the Utah government comes after them, they just cross over into Arizona and vice versa. So they're very Joseph Smith that way.
Cara,
Yes.
what is heaven to a Mormon?
Ooh, okay. It's like, I'm not really the best at church history because it was a really long time ago when I went, but there are 3 levels, as far as I remember. There's the celestial kingdom, the telestial kingdom, and the terrestrial kingdom. That's in the right order, right? And so one thing that I remember, when my parents were divorced when I was 7 years old, and my father stayed in the church, he ultimately married a Mormon woman and maintained sort of that lineage on his side of the family. And my mother left the church. And I remember when my father was getting remarried and they were about to go to the temple to have that marriage and to go through all of these covenants, that I was doing the math, and I realized that according to church dogma, my father and his new wife, this woman that I didn't know, and the children would be in heaven in the celestial kingdom, which is like within the glory of God. It's the highest level. My mother would have somehow ended up, I think, in the terrestrial, right? Because she left. So I could go down to visit her, but she couldn't visit me. So I was not going to be in heaven with my own mother because of her. And I think at 7 years old, that didn't sit well with me. And that's really one of those things that, so heaven is quite strange. There are these 3 levels. One is, you get your own planet. Not me, though, because I'm a woman.
Spare babies. Spare babies for eternity.
Exactly. Just making the babies. And then there's like the heaven that's on earth is the terrestrial. And then hell is like a totally different thing than most people think of when they think of hell in Christianity. Yeah.
So we've got 3 degrees of glory. You've got the celestial, terrestrial, and celestial kingdom. But it is worth noting that the 3 of us are doomed to outer darkness. Aren't we?
Outer darkness is kind of their conception of hell.
We get a different level.
And it's different because it's cold. And there's all I remember about outer darkness is that there's a gnashing of the teeth.
Yeah,
this is like
wailing. Yep. Your soul will be racked with torment. Yep. No, and really, this is a fun argument to get into missionaries with. If you happen to see any of them around, please talk to them. They don't know anything about the world. It's great.
Well, in their defense, they're like 18 years old.
Yeah,
they're
true.
children.
They can't know anything about the world yet. The most immoral thing for a Mormon to do is to tell somebody about Mormonism. Because if you learn about the gospel and you reject it, then you're doomed to outer darkness. But if you never hear it, then you have the potential to get celestial glory, because the Mormons will do your ordinances for you after your death, the Mormon necromancy, right?
Yeah, the baptism for the dead.
Baptisms and sealings and everything. They'll do it after you die. So if a missionary comes up to talk to you, just stop them before they say anything and say, if you talk to me anymore, you're damning me to outer darkness. Sets the conversation off on a weird foot.
So we're not doing you any favors today.
No.
I had an interesting experience in Southport because I was walking down one of the streets in Southport and there were 2 clearly Mormon missionaries on the street. And they had the clipboards for the survey and all that kind of flashing white teeth. So I kind of walked past them hintily. They didn't pick up on it. So I literally turned around and walked back the other way hintily. And they picked up on it. Excuse me, sir, could we just do a quick survey? So we spent the next hour or so engaged in, an interesting chat about the nature of faith and so on and so forth, at the end of which they said, oh, well, we're just going to have to agree to disagree, aren't we? I said, sure. Well, anyway, it was lovely meeting you. Next time you see my brother, say hi to him for me. They said, sorry. I said, Chris Wilson, you probably know him. He's bishop of the church. He said, you're Chris Wilson's brother? And they were literally staying at his house. It's awesome. I love it. Bryce, can black people go to heaven? Any of the heavens.
Now they can.
Now they can. No, so prior to 1978, people of color were part... 1978, yeah, sorry. I should have specified. So a fun little history behind this. The church basically declared that anybody of Native American descent or African descent had the curse of Cain. They were building a temple in South America, and they realized that if they don't allow people with the curse into the temple, then that's going to be an empty temple and a lost investment. So they decided in 1978, after there were protests at BYU and there was the NAACP had spoken out repeatedly against the church, they finally decided, we'll go ahead and let black people into heaven. So,
cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
Secular society, once again, pushing on the church. It changes. But it's divine revelation, people. Never forget that.
And the weird thing is, I mentioned I was born in 1983 and I grew up in the church. And for those first, let's say 10, 15 years of my life, like I grew up in Plano, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. And there were black people in my ward. And I remember when I found that out, it was just a few years ago. Why did they want to join? That was really weird to me.
That's
always kind of
strange.
Yeah, why would you want to join such a bigoted organization?
And it does have such an effect on you as well, because I don't feel totally comfortable talking to black people today, and not from any sense, of course, of racism, but I just can't believe that I allowed myself to be in such a racist organization, and I feel almost like apologizing. It's just strange.
Is it possible the QED audience could forgive Greg?
Yes.
A round of applause.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got another question here, and then we're going to go to some audience questions. Fun times, we're going to talk about mind control. So the next question is about whether Mormonism is a cult. According to the mental health counsellor Stephen Hassan, who's written extensively on mind control, there are 4 characteristics through which a cult exerts influence. He calls it the bite model. I'm going to tweet the thing out now from the QED account if you want to play along. He calls it the bite model. The 4 things, the 4 characteristics are behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. So we're just going to take these one by one. Cara, can you bring to mind any examples of what you now see as an unhealthy desire to control behavior by the church?
And so I guess the real question here is,
It's the one I just read out. Literally, I just read it.
Are we making a distinction? Because I do find that Mormonism is kind of not that different than most religions in this way. And so are we asking a general Mormon thing, or like that's actually different than other sort of Christian religions?
Well, let's clarify it a little bit, because there was a recent, you referred to the fundamentalist crowd as
FLDS.
FLDS. LDS is now forbidden terminology, isn't it?
It is?
Because the elder, Russell and well, you explain why.
So wait,
Bryce.
What are we calling them now?
We can't call them Mormons
Just
anymore.
very briefly, Bryce, talk about this, please.
Yeah, so recently the prophet said that we're no longer going to use the term Mormon anymore, or LDS, that we are supposed to be referred to as saints of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints,
He
or
wants them
members.
to be called saints?
Saints, yeah, and that's their new history book that just came out this year too. But if you think about it, I mean, you have Mormon podcasts, you have headlines talking about Mormon sex scandals that are going on and sex abuse that's happening with Mormon bishops. It's rebranding, right? And it really is egg on their face, because they put millions into the I'm a Mormon campaign.
They did, oh yeah.
And they have the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
Yeah.
But now they're saints.
So who would like to say what the Mormon Tabernacle Choir must now be called?
Anybody?
It's going to be called. It's just going to be called the Tabernacle Choir.
Oh, is it?
So, yeah.
Oh,
No, it's the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square.
Oh, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So behavior, a way that the Mormon...
I just want to make another note on what Bryce was saying, which is they've gone to this huge effort to stop calling it LDS. Guess what the website is?
LDS.
Yeah. Sorry, Karen.
Oh, so way that the Mormon Church controls behavior.
Yes.
So many ways. I mean, it's funny because some of them actually, I think, are measurably healthy, right? Some Mormons don't drink and they don't smoke, and there's a lot of things that they don't do, and they, it's like it's a health thing. But also, I mean, I'm going to take this from the perspective of a woman. There is, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, Bryce, there's this idea that women must maintain purity and that they have to kind of be virginal. And I mean, the men are supposed to do that too, but there's a lot of onus put on the woman, how she dresses, how she carries herself. Like, we were raised not to induce any sort of uncontrollable desire in all the penises around us. And so I think in that way, it is very controlling, because from the time you're very young as a child, there's this backlash effect where you actually are highly sexualized, because you're taught from the time that you're very young that if you don't dress a certain way and act a certain way, men won't be able to control themselves around you. And so it's kind of exactly opposite, I think, what they wanted to happen.
And if you happen to be defiled or defile yourself, you're the licked cupcake or the chewed piece of gum. They have all these wonderful analogies too.
And by the way, sorry to take a little more time, when you do baptisms for the dead, which is a whole thing, you do it as a younger person. You have to get a temple recommend. It's kind of the only time that young people can go into the temple. You do what's called an interview for your temple recommend with your bishop, and they ask you the most invasive questions about, have you engaged in any sexual activities? Do you fantasize? I remember one time my bishop asked me if I'd ever engaged in heavy petting. And I was like, what is that? Like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
I think as well, such a lot of it is formed on guilt, and you have to have these priesthood meetings with your bishop, and they ask you these.
The men do this, by the way.
The men, by the way, sorry, and you have to. They ask you things about your sex, masturbation. They're obsessed with. They ask you about all these most personal kind of things, and you're sitting there, and you're just so vulnerable. And I was at the time in my life, I wasn't outgoing then, and I remember being asked the question, why haven't you got a girlfriend now? And I used to come up with all these excuses because I had a girlfriend before I joined. I used to come up with all these stupid excuses, whereas now, I'd like to have perhaps gone around and just kissed him on the cheek or something. I just wouldn't, it wouldn't be the same.
I feel you've brought up the bishop's interview. I was definitely going to insert a joke about bashing the bishop there, but moment's lost. Let's just lay it out very explicitly what's going on here. This is an older man talking to young, early teenage boys and girls.
I think from the time you're 12, right? Is that when you can get a temple recommend?
And for your baptism at 8, too.
Oh, at 8?
Usually the sexual questions aren't in there.
Yeah, they avoid. That's just like thoughts about, do you Satan?
Is this a chaperoned situation, or is it one-on-one?
It's one-on-one. It's not chaperoned.
Yeah, closed doors,
Closed
one-on-one.
doors.
Anybody see anything wrong with that?
And
What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah.
And bishops are not trained in counseling. They're not mandatory reporters. They're car salesmen. It's a voluntary, unpaid calling with absolutely no training, and they're taking children behind closed doors and asking them about their masturbation habits.
Yeah, that is a weird, different thing in the Mormon Church than in some other organizations that maybe at the highest levels this is their job, but most everything is a calling, which means these people have full-time jobs. They don't get paid for this at all. This is just something they do because they're that devout. It's quite strange. So you're right. Not only are they not trained, they kind of have no idea what they're doing.
And that's part of the behavior control, too, is because there's a lot of busy work in the church, too. You are always doing something. Monday nights is family home evening. Wednesday or Tuesday nights is mutual improvement activities. Service callings on Saturdays or Fridays, and then Sunday all day if you're in leadership callings within the church. You are occupied all day away from your family.
Minimum church is 3 hours long on Sunday for like just a normal person who doesn't have any sort of calling.
Yeah.
So, Greg, obviously Cara and Bryce, they're both Americans. Do you see any differences between their experiences growing up in America compared with your experiences becoming a Mormon here? Does that sound the same to you?
It does sound the same. I mean, I would say that when I was LDS, Mormon, whatever you want to call it, I didn't realize that this was going on as regards to the interviews of young children. I mean, I would have, whatever. I think that would be reprehensible. But I think the population here is about 0.8% is actually Mormon. Okay. So in a way, you're even more. Every single faction of your life is taken up. Everything is this, as Bryce said just now, there's something on every day. You're continuously programmed. And you're doing it without really realizing you're doing it.
Okay, thanks, Greg.
Well, and just one final point, too.
Okay.
Those interviews, there's a guy that is a former bishop that has campaigned to stop those. Led a march through Salt Lake City I attended. He went on a 23-day hunger strike against the church to change these. They excommunicated him instead of changing the one-on-one policies.
Well, he's a hero. What's his name?
Sam Young.
Sam Young?
Yep.
So, Bryce, we're going to have to just speed up these next couple of questions. So, probably asking the wrong person then. Bryce, same question to you, but about information. Can you speak to whether the church institutionally seeks to control the information digested by its members in an unhealthy way?
Yeah, I fight this all day, every day. I know Mormon history. What's interesting is when you begin diving down the rabbit hole of Mormon history, it's a lot of ex-Mormons who do that, people who transition out of the church once they learn Mormon history, because you realize how patently bullshit it is. I fight with information control every day, and when you have a conversation with a believer, there's a chasm of knowledge that they don't know that most ex-Mormons do know about church history that you can't bridge that divide. and that causes conflicts in family members. And on the historical perspective too, because I that's what I do. I study Mormon history for a living. The church, almost every historian that's ever written about Mormon history has been employed by the church. The church controls almost all the documentation that is allowed to be published about church history. They've recently begun publishing Joseph Smith papers. Every piece of paper, every document attached to Joseph Smith. He was a fun, charismatic leader, but all of the Brigham Young papers, the theocratic dictator, all of those are sealed away. Nobody has access to them. So they control every single piece of information from your day-to-day life to the amount of history of the church that you know, to the amount of the church doctrine and theology that you know. Every single piece of information is controlled.
And they have a massive amount of money and a massively strong lobby. I mean, they're very savvy politically as an organization, and they're able to do this because they can control, I don't want to say control, but they can influence elections. We've seen it happen, time and time again. Okay. Another way, though, that they control information, beyond the fact that when you grow up in the church, you don't really know the church history, you know their version, is that you are told not to watch R-rated movies. You're told not to listen to impure music. So in a way, you're sort of separated from modern society also. There's not a lot of mind control in the sense that you're allowed to be in society, but there's sort of a deviant side of society that most Mormon families, quote unquote, try to avoid and kind of cordon themselves off against.
See, I likened it almost to the old Soviet Union, where they would give the people their version of history that they wanted them to have. And most of the things that are coming out now are coming out because of Google, actually, years ago. And we have people like professors at BYU who were sacked from their jobs because they were actually telling students what was the real history, some of the real aspects of the history. And at that time, they were actually sacked for doing it. But now, of course, it's out there for everyone to see. You had to dig deep to actually find it years ago, whereas you don't have to today.
Okay. Greg, we'll hear more about sexuality after the first round of audience questions. But were there any other ways in which thoughts were subject to control that you can think of? Perhaps an example.
Well, you're just programmed. I mean, the idea of the coffee, I mean, it's not even for any reason other than it's just an aspect of control. And you're giving up and you're behaving in different ways. I mean, my heart was telling me one thing and my mind was telling me another. And you're just controlled. And I remember loads of examples, but it is just controlling.
Okay.
Very.
So one-word answers, please. Mm-hmm. Starting with you, Greg. Is Mormonism a cult?
Yes.
Cara?
Yes, but so is most of their religion.
or yes, but I don't want to think of my family being in a cult.
No, really, I don't think it's that different.
Yeah.
I don't think there's something cult-like about Mormonism that's not cult-like about Catholics. I don't. I really don't.
Bryce?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Cara, you're in the minority because I think it is as well.
I do too.
I said it was.
Let's have some audience questions. Oh, there are questions. Thanks, Alex. So we have the catch box. If this is new to you, this is the latest technology in roving microphones, where I basically throw it to you. So if you're the first person with it, you've got to get it. You've got to throw it. Use it. We work as a team to get it to the next question. You got it? All right. So I'm going over here. So I'm going to pass it over here first. And you're going to Hadar. Whoa. Oh. Good catch.
You need to press anything.
There's a square on the top. Just talk directly into it.
So I'm sorry. I have a little list because I was listening.
Okay. Just hold that a little closer.
There's a lot of resemblance between some of the things you said about Mormonism to religious people in Israel, Jews. The way women has to dress. Information control, music, men aren't allowed to listen to women sing. Women aren't allowed to sing. Restrictions on TV, on smartphones, and food restrictions, of course. And there's also, it feels like the Mormons took some vocabulary from Judaism. Tabernacle, Zion.
The Lost Tribes of Israel. Yeah.
And submarines, of course.
Yeah.
Do you think, it's mostly for Bryce, do you think that's on purpose?
Yeah, I mean, it plays into their theology, right? So the Native Americans were one of the lost tribes of Israel. And when you are a Mormon, you get what's called your Patriarchal Blessing. And that's where the patriarch of the church declares your Jewish lineage. So I'm from the tribe of Ephraim.
Does it go back to the
Hadar, okay. When you've got the box, can you ask your question, then wait for the answer, and then move the question along? Thanks, Hadar. Carry on, Bryce.
Sorry, say it again?
Should just continue what you were saying about the tribes,
Yeah.
I think.
So, it's all part of the culture when they consider all of the saints are the saints and everybody else are the Gentiles. It's all very, very much so borrowed from those old traditions.
Yeah. Who's next, please?
I'm more familiar with Jehovah's, and one big difference in the two is the Jehovah's teach that all of the religions are bullshit and teach a lot of details about it.
Oh.
And then
Not a difference.
Not a difference.
Very central to the
and
LDS
that's why
faith.
I know so many Jehovah's who then in their teens just realise their religion's also bullshit.
I think
and my question is that very much the same?
it's very much the same. And I think the difference, if there's going to be one, will be the fact that in Mormonism, the president of the church is revered as a prophet who speaks directly with God, which the Jehovah's Witnesses don't say that they do that, So, but other than that, I think it's very, very similar.
Yeah, from the time you're born, you're told that you are in the one true religion and that there are many other religions. They are not the one true religion. And we had a rule in my house that I could go to church with my friends, but only if then they came to church with me. I couldn't skip my church to go to another church for that reason, because this was all about fellowshipping and it was all about bringing people into the fold. Yeah.
Cool. Another question?
And don't forget about this side of the room.
Yeah.
Hello. So I live in Brighton, right round the corner from a Mormon church. And every now and then they'll try and come up to me and speak to me and help me with my shopping and whatnot. Aside from getting in an argument with them about everything, is there anything you could or should say to them to, try and get across the things that you guys have gone through and to try and maybe give some back on?
Are you asking about just churchgoers or are you asking about missionaries?
Missionaries. Yeah, the people who come up to you in the street to try and talk to you.
I would not try to convert a missionary. Do you feel differently?
Well,
Deconvert.
I come at this from a different perspective because I love talking to missionaries. My favorite pastime. My favorite thing to do is to talk to missionaries about the Doctrine and Covenants, because the Mormons have the Bible, King James only, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and Pearl of Great Price. That's their holy canon. The Doctrine and Covenants are Joseph's revelations as something happened in the church, he spoke by the voice of God to make something happen. You go buy a printing press, you give me your tithing money, so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's a list of rules, basically.
Yeah. Exactly. My favorite thing to do is talk to missionaries about the Doctrine and Covenants and say, okay, so why was this revelation to this person specifically? What happened? What did this person do that they apostatized? Because that's a way to explore church history on the same level as them and introduce them to a side of church history that they never know. But the thing is, you have to be comfortable with that information first if you're going to broach that subject. So I approach it far differently than probably anybody else does.
I mean, and I don't have the expertise that Bryce has. This isn't my job. I was just raised in the church. And I think that the best thing that we can do really is remember, that these missionaries are kids. They're delaying college to go on their missions first. They are heavily indoctrinated. They are just as much of a victim as anybody else in this scheme. And I think the best thing that we can do is, if you are an atheist, a non-theist, is to, you can say that and show them that you're a good person anyway. Because I don't think that they've ever been told, It's really not about deconverting them. You're not going to do that in a single conversation, and maybe that shouldn't be your goal, but you can show them that there's a bigger world out there. Yeah, I think that's important.
Okay, there's still a couple of things. Can you just keep hold of that for the moment, please? So there's still a couple of things I want to cover. We're going to talk about sex now.
Yay! But it's really like a huge bummer in the church. Yeah, it's not.
But then we're going to talk about suicide. So I'm just letting you know that that's coming up in a moment. So Mormon doctrine puts tight... We've not got much time left, so we just need to give it the hurry up a little bit. Mormon doctrine puts tight controls on sex itself, and they have many, many rules and regulations around it. Greg, could you tell us about your own experiences, please? Not your actual sexual experience, but your experience.
That wouldn't take long.
How about it?
But from my perspective, I mean, I had a girlfriend before I became a Mormon. You know, I was in a relationship with. And then, of course, when you hear about we were talking about the chastity earlier, the law of chastity, when they told me that news, it was just like winning the lottery for me. You know what I mean? I just thought it was just brilliant because things then evolved on. And, so sex is a big guilt trip for them as well.
What's their approach to sexuality?
Well, homosexuality, of course, is just an absolute...
Could you tell us a little bit about how that came about in your membership of the church?
Yeah, because once you've been in the church for a few years, you go to a place called the temple, which is supposed to be sacred. It's actually secret. And you have to have these interviews. And I went for my last interview before I had this endowment ceremony, it's called. And he said, is there anything you want to tell me? And I said, well, actually, because I was starting to have the odd twang there, I said, I actually am attracted to men. And his face, it was just like there'd been some sort of earthquake or something. And he said to me, have you acted upon it? And I said, I should have said, well, is it an offer? And he said, have you acted upon it? And I said, no. And he proceeded then to take out these two pieces like Nazi pamphlets thing about how awful homosexuality was Kimball and Boy K. Packer. And he gave me these things, and I had to go off with them. And my mum and dad were outside. They'd driven me there.
Wait,
and
how old were you? You were 19 at the time.
I was 19. Well, no, I was 19 when I joined, so I'd have been about 23 here at this stage. And they were outside, and I just said to him, I'm very conscious that my mum and dad are outside. And he looked at me and he said, well, keep your bloody voice down. Mm-hmm. That's what he said. And I went home, and I was very depressed. I'm not a depressive person. I was suicidal. And I went home, and I read this, and it was just the very worst thing you could possibly experience, to see and to read, when you're feeling so low.
I have two quick comments about this, or quick stories. The first is that I have a younger brother who's gay, and my father, so all of my brothers, I have many siblings, I have a very mixed family, and my brothers were all adopted, and they were adopted as teenagers or adolescents. So, you know, in one way, I think it's really incredible what my father and his wife did. In another way, but so one of my brothers, he was adopted quite late in life, so he never really got into the Mormon thing, and I don't think my parents expected him. You know, they took him to church every week, but he was already, had thoughts and ideas. He was older than 8 years old. Anyway, he's finally come out. He's, in his 20s now. He's an adult. And I was talking to my father on the phone the other day, and I was first taken aback by how progressive his answers were. Oh, we love, he has a boyfriend, and he's such a sweet guy, and we invite them over for dinner, and oh, that's so cool, Dad. And I was like, so have you really changed your views? You sound very progressive. And he was like, well, as far as the church is concerned, it's an abomination. And here's the thing, he literally expects that if somebody wants to that he said he doesn't believe it's a choice, he believes that you're born that way, but it's a choice to act on it. And if you want to maintain your religious standing, that you have to choose to be celibate if you're in the LGBTQ community. And and he even realized, he said to me, that's a choice I would never expect somebody to make, which is why I understand that most gays and lesbians leave the church. Mm-hmm. It was the craziest cognitive dissonance that I had ever experienced. The second thing I'll say is that my older sister, she actually told the bishop that she had sex before marriage, no idea why. And so they didn't let her get married in the temple. And I got to go to her wedding. It was in the church. And I remember, and most people aren't in on this if they don't have these ordinances, these covenants, whatever you call them. So most people don't get to see a Mormon wedding. And I remember I was crying in the front row because we're going to call them Dick and Jane, because I'm not going to say their names. Do you, Dick, agree to serve the Lord in everything you choose, in all of your decisions, blah, 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 forever? No. I do. Do you, Jane, agree to serve Dick in every one of his... Really took the sting out of it there. But, I it was mortifying to me, this idea that there's like like through transitive properties, eventually the woman has the glory of God, but that she is in service to her husband. And I don't know, it's a thing.
Bryce, again, very briefly, please.
It was very brief.
Yeah, what is the institutional sort of historical approach towards that? Do you have more to offer from the history of the church?
Yeah, this where this basically started was when the government was trying to take the territory out of the iron clutches of Brigham Young. It's known as the Mormon Reformation period. That's when they created home teaching, which is the policing force, the community policing force. That's when they created the bishops' interviews. And it was just in order to make sure that members stay members. And anybody who is not deemed as worthy, everybody had to be rebaptized again in Utah territory. Anybody who was not totally beholden to the ultimate authority of the presidency, they were kicked out of Utah. So that is how that was created. That's the historical genesis of what we're talking about. And it's understandable.
Thank you. So we've just got we're going to talk about suicide now. It's recently been reported that suicide rates in Utah have increased by 46.5%. One particular study has shown that suicide rates there are positively correlated with Mormon culture, norms and rhetoric, especially in the LGBT youth. If that study is correct, I'd like each panellist to comment on the question, does the Mormon Church care what's happening to its members? Greg?
I don't think that they do. And they have 2 conferences a year. And the suicide rates for LGBT people, just after the conference, they go even higher. And so the pressure that's on these young people to conform and just to not be themselves, because I come from a different age, obviously, much older than this lady here. And when I was in the church, the sexual orientation was wrong. It was evil. So even the very thought was evil. So today they're now saying, well, you can be gay, but as long as you don't practice it, which makes you ask, what if you get it right? And then you get to have that.
As a thinker.
Yeah. And so the pressure on these young people, and I just think it's awful. And the answer is no, I don't think they care at all. No.
Cara?
Yeah, I think that we have to be careful that we're not, there's a synecdoche here, right? We often talk about the church. Are we talking about the church leadership? Are we talking about the people in the church? People in the church absolutely care. I mean, families have been destroyed by this. And there are so many parents who find themselves torn between their lifelong dedication to an ideal and their children who are suffering. And it's a devastating experience for many families. When we talk about the church leadership, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think they're evil people. I think they're incredibly misguided people. And I personally don't believe in evil, so it's hard to say they're evil people. But I think that it's one of those things where it doesn't matter to them until it's in their own family, right? We see this in American politics. People are like super anti-LGBT. And then they're like, oh, but my daughter's a lesbian. Yay, gay rights. And I think that that's something we see there as well.
Bryce, does the church care about its particularly young and...
Absolutely. Yeah. I think so. But the problem is they care within the parameters that the culture and theology dictate. Mm-hmm. So they care about their kids as much as every one of us care about our kids. They care about all of their members just as much as we all care about each other in this room of people that share a collective idea. However, if you cared about them enough, you would change the theology. You would change the culture. But they can't do that. They're stuck in a more than a centuries-long sunk cost fallacy of controlling people's sexuality, and they are not allowed to let their mind topple over that threshold to understand that it's because of those things that's causing the depression and suicide epidemic in Utah and in Mormon culture. Because if they changed that, then that would be walking back on their theology. That would be admitting fault. That would at some level be admitting that they are responsible for LGBTQ and people's suicide in Utah and the depression and anxiety that leads up to that. And to admit fault on that, you're admitting that your theology is wrong. They can't do that. So they have to operate inside those parameters. They
have a different explanation, right? If we're linking here suicide rate to LGBTQ youth, which is a subsection, they're not going to say it's because our church isn't letting them be who they truly are. They're going to say, oh, they're depressed because they're gay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem.
Exactly.
There's an explanation there that fits with the theology.
In Eagle Mountain, Utah, every Sunday, church members are encouraged to stand at the microphone and share their thoughts and feelings. In 2017, a 13-year-old girl called Savannah gave a humble and powerful speech declaring that as a lesbian, she did not believe God or her parents had made a mistake. One sentence from her speech read, "They did not mess up when they gave me freckles or when they made me to be gay. God loves me just this way." It was beautiful. The two male counsellors running proceedings cut off her microphone partway through and told her to sit down before she finished her speech. I recommend everybody Googles Savannah Mormon to find out more about this. This was just writ large for me. Anyway, we are running out of time, and I must use this time in the most productive way. In seconds, what's the weirdest thing you ever encountered in Mormonism, please?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, start.
Having to get naked in the temple and having to put on a poncho, having oil put over your body, and I also, really.
They don't tell us any of this.
Trust me, you didn't see who was doing it. and also, I think because I've had a career working predominantly with women, and I'm such a feminist. And looking to the left in this temple ceremony and watching the women, the men do it as well, holding their hands up and pulling their thumbs across their throat, signifying having their throat cut from ear to ear if they ever revealed a Masonic handshake. And to me, it was just unbelievable. And as I said to you earlier, my heart told me, this is awful. Yeah. And my mind thought, well, it must be okay.
That's amazing.
I mean, I left when I was 14, 15. So the weirdest thing I did was baptisms for the dead because I was still youth. And so you wear a weird white zippy and all white underwear, and you go into a baptismal font. And at the time, my dad, held the priesthood, and so he was the one doing it. And they have a script printed on the inside of the font. I, so-and-so, in the name of so-and-so, baptize you in the name of so-and-so, who is dead. And then they dunk you. But it's like, you do like 8 in a row, which is also kind of weird. And so, that's... Genealogy in the church is all about finding lost souls.
Yeah.
They do great genealogy. Unfortunately, it's driven for a very strange reason.
Okay, Greg? Sorry, Bryce.
Honestly, I stumble on weird shit in the church every day. But the weirdest part for me was growing up in it and not thinking anything was weird, and then moving outside of Utah and seeing how the rest of the world views Mormonism. That was the weirdest thing for me.
Amazing. Well, look, we have to cut it there. Who's got my catch box? Okay, I need that back, obviously. Eventually, it's okay. Oh, well done. Yeah. How was your basketball career, Grant? I want to thank everybody in the room for coming to this talk, but most of all, I'd like to thank Greg Rattey, Cara Santamaria, and Bryce Blankenagel for joining me on this panel. Enjoy the rest of QED. I'll see you later.